Welcome to the Connor Museum of Antique Printing. The museum was built in 2002 and 2003 and dedicated on April 30th, 2003. A large crowd was present for the dedication, including many dignitaries, such as Lieutenant Governor Joe Kernan. With many donations from local contractors, art center members, service organizations, and the Mellencamp Fan Club, the building became a reality. The building was designed to fit the 1800s motif, since most of the equipment dates to that era. Notice the plank flooring and wood ceiling, much like it would have been during that time. The outside is rough cedar, which is aging to a gray tone, and the lettering is solid copper, which is also aging. We display the Betsy Ross American flag outside, and notice the hand-poured window panes with their imperfections. We have simulated gas lights, however there would not have been electric lights nor electric heating and air conditioning. Our candles, however, are hand-dipped beeswax. Each candle is dipped 35 times. In the 1800s, the heating would have been from a pot-bellied stove in the middle of the room, and the air conditioning would have been an open window. The main purpose of the building was to preserve the history of printing and to preserve some of the presses and equipment that were used by the local newspaper during the early years. We have named the museum after the Connor family because they were the owners of the Seymour Tribune when it was a family affair. Since we are an art center, we recognize that printing was and is one of the major arts. But first, let us go back to the 1800s. Direct your attention to the timeline along the south wall, starting with the cave drawings and stone and clay tablets. Since the cavemen, there has always been a desire to preserve man's way of life. Cave drawings and paintings have been discovered that date back thousands of years. Since the temperature was constant in caves, much of the color was preserved. The artist attempted to draw events that surrounded them. Often the drawings were simplified to stick figures. Since man had to move about to find ways to exist, they attempted to take the drawings with them. We have found examples of stone scratched with primitive designs. Later, they discovered that they could press their designs into soft clay and bake it into a hard brick. A simple language was developed called cuneiform. Wedge-shaped designs carved on the ends of sticks and pressed into the clay were used to create a simple language. The Egyptians wanted a lighter-weight material, one that could be written upon and transported easily. Papyrus, a plant that grew along the Nile River, served this purpose. The plant would be soaked and stripped into stringy fibers, which were woven into sheets and rubbed smooth. They perfected a picture language called hieroglyphics, which they drew with pointed sticks and powdered ink mixed with oil. You may feel a sample of papyrus. Also, animal skins were found to be flexible and durable when treated with lye and lime. The hair would be dissolved away and the skin rubbed thin and smooth. Calf skin was called vellum, and sheepskin called parchment. Parchment was used in our country for special documents such as college diplomas. It was often said that a student went to college to earn their sheepskin. Feel the samples of parchment and vellum. The Asians developed forms of paper as we know it several thousand years ago. They used rice papers long before the making of paper reached Europe. Today, the bulk of paper is made from wood pulp. Feel the example of handmade paper. Notice the copper tub and decals, the screens used to dip handmade paper. Messages needed to be sent by runner or horseback over long distances. Papyrus or parchment was written upon, rolled up, and tied. Often it would be sealed for privacy. The scroll would be unrolled and read, reading from top to bottom. Later the writing was done in sections, and the scroll could be read horizontally. This method led to cutting the sections apart, then stacking and binding them to create what was known as codex. Later, this developed into the book as we know it. Writing instruments developed over the years. One of the most effective ones was the quill. The end of a large feather was cut to a point and split. This was known as the nib. The quill was dipped into ink, mostly made of lamp black and oil. The ink would be stored in the hollow part of the feather and would flow out through the nib. Several words could be written with one dip of the quill. With the split nib, a variety of widths by the stroke of the quill could be created, giving a pleasant appearance to the writing. The early documents of our country, such as the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, were written with a quill. Notice the facsimile of the Gettysburg Address. Later, the metal pen point came into being. This developed into the fountain pen and later the ballpoint pen. Letters and documents were often sealed for privacy. Sealing wax was melted and poured onto the document or envelope, and a signet, a stamp of some sort, was pressed into it. This was usually a coat of arms or other symbol of the sender. If the seal wasn't broken, the receiver knew that no one else had read it. This sealing system carried over to our present-day notary public. Through this period of time, all written materials were done by hand. The Asians had used the woodblock printing method centuries before, however, it was mainly for pictures. The written word was done letter by letter to create pages of information. These manuscripts were often decorated beautifully with color illustrations. It was not until the 1400s that a man in Germany by the name of Johann Gutenberg came up with the idea of casting each raised letter onto a block of metal. These letters could be assembled into words and pages of words and inked. Paper or parchment could be pressed against the assembled form to produce a printed page. He devised a printing press from a wine press to apply this pressure. With this knowledge, he set about printing the Bible. It is thought that he printed around 180 copies, some on paper and some on vellum. Only 46 are known in existence, mostly with pages missing. Only 3 are known to be complete. The Lilly Library in Bloomington has one of the few copies, the only one in the Midwest. It has 11 pages missing. The photograph of the printing press is that of a press brought over from Mainz, Germany to Louisville in 2000. From it, they were printing a facsimile of a page of the Gutenberg Bible. The printed page was handed to Mr. Hill, Associate Director of the Art Center, directly off the press. The painting of the Gutenberg was done by SICA artist Sue Pogue shortly before her death. The model of the Gutenberg press was made by Mr. Hill. You will now view a 9-minute video of the printing in Louisville and a clip from the movie The Colonial Printer, filmed in Colonial Williamsburg. If a docent isn't available, use the remote to turn on the TV. The clip will repeat itself. This part was filmed by Don Hill. The docent is inking separate parts of the facsimile of the Gutenberg Bible page that you see framed on the wall. It is printed in 3 colors, black, red, and blue. After the type is inked, he inserts the sheet of paper and pushes the form under the pressure plate. Since this is a large amount of area to print, it will take a considerable amount of pressure to get a good print. Think about doing this all day. The print is removed and handed to Mr. Hill. The second part of the video is a section taken from the movie Colonial Printer. It shows how important the print shop was during the Revolutionary War. The 2 workers in the print shop are the young apprentice and the journeyman. The apprentice would be a young boy around the age of 14 whose parents sign a contract with the print shop owner for their boy to learn the trade. He would work without pay for 6 to 7 years. The print shop owner would usually feed and take care of him as a family member. The young apprentice would get a very good education which most other boys his age would not get. He would learn to read, how to spell, and create sentences and punctuation. Most people, including adults, did not have this knowledge. He would do the dirty work. He would learn how the presses worked and how to clean the presses and type. He would learn how to set type and, under the instructions of the journeyman, learn the printing trade. At the end of his apprenticeship, he could possibly be hired as a journeyman or go out and earn a living doing other things. In the video, the apprentice is soaking paper and pressing it for the next day. The ink they used seemed to stick to damp paper best. Next, the journeyman is showing him how to set type. Note that there are 2 cases. One at the top held capital letters, and the case at the bottom held the small letters. Thus, the terms upper and lower case. Sound familiar? The apprentice would always check with the journeyman to have it okayed. The journeyman is locking up a form of type. The frame is called a chase. The wooden blocks used to fill out the open areas are called furniture. It is ready to place in the press. The apprentice inks the type with inking balls. This would be before there was material to make rollers. The journeyman makes an impression on the frisket paper and cuts out that section. The frisket is raised and the paper that is to be printed is placed in the guides called gauge pens. The type is inked again and the frisket and paper are lowered into place and the form is pushed under the pressure plate. Notice that this does not take as much pressure as the Gutenberg Bible page since it is much smaller. The operation is repeated until the necessary number of prints is made. The apprentice does the inking and usually gets ink on himself. The journeyman keeps his hands clean since he is handling the paper. After the printing is done, the type must be returned to the case in order to be used again. Handling the locked-up form must be handled very carefully. Oops! This is called ping the type. I'm afraid the apprentice would spend many hours working overtime to sort this all out. The next section along the timeline shows examples of methods for printing pictures. The Asians used wood blocks to print pictures. Using a smooth piece of wood, they would carve away the areas that they did not want to print and leave up the printing areas. Inking the raised surface would produce a print on rice paper. We have linoleum blocks which work the same way, only they are easier to carve. Etching is another method of printing pictures. Images are scratched into a metal plate. The plate is inked, and the ink is then rubbed off the surface. Ink remains in the scratches. When the paper is pressed against the plate, the ink is pulled out of the scratches onto the paper. Examples here show plates both scratched and acid etched. Here you have the printer's cap. The press operator would come to work and make a cap from yesterday's newspaper. During the workday, the cap would get smeared with ink. At the end of the day, they would tear the cap up. This was considered a personal thing that only the press operators could wear the cap. They tore them up so no one else would know how to fold them. We have the secret. In your packet of handouts, you will have the instructions on folding the printer's cap. You also notice we have a pair of eyeglasses. As it states, we have no proof that these were not Ben Franklin's glasses he wore when signing the Declaration of Independence. Franklin was known as an inventor, statesman, diplomat, and many other accomplishments, but on his tombstone it states, Ben Franklin, printer. As we come around the corner, we see examples of stone lithography and copper printing plates. We have a journal of handmade paper made by the monks in Nepal. The old bookbinding press was used to press the books while the binding was drying. After Gutenberg started casting his type, he had to have a place to store it and find each letter easily. Two type cases were developed, one storing the capital letters and one the small letters, thus the upper and lower case letters. Later, when the print shops were being started in the colonies and then moving westward, they needed to conserve space when necessary when transporting equipment by covered wagon. Thus, the California job case was developed. Everything needed to set one style and one size type was in one case. The capital letters, lowercase letters, numbers, punctuation, and spacing material were arranged according to usage. The typesetter learned the case as the typist does the keyboard. They never had to look to find a letter, it just came naturally. Refer to the labeled case on the wall. The letters were placed in a composing stick as the typesetter picked them up. Each piece of type has a nick in one edge. This nick let the typesetters know which way the piece of type would be placed in the stick. Usually, they did not look at the letter itself, since many styles would be hard to read anyway. Keeping in mind they would be starting with the first line at the bottom of the stick and working up to the top. Also, each letter would be upside down. Thus, they would have to be able to read upside down and backwards. Strips of metal, known as leads and slugs, were placed in between each line. The printers devised their own measuring system since different areas of the world used different systems. Points and picas denote the printer's measurements. Points measure the size of type, and picas measure the length of lines. These are still used on our modern computers today. Once the composing stick was full, the type would be slid out into a galley, and the setting would resume. After the job was completed, the form would be tied up with a string. It was important the form was carefully handled, since it would fall apart easily. Usually, it was slid from one place to another without picking it up. It would be slid onto the stone to be locked up. The stone-topped table would give a smooth surface to ensure the type would be level. A metal frame called the chase would be placed around the form, and blocks of wood called furniture would fill in the empty space. This would be tightened with locks called quoins. This locked-up form would be ready to be placed in the printing press or stored in a galley for later use. Now, let's direct our attention to the Washington press in the middle of the room. According to our records, this press was used by our local newspaper as far back as 1850. It works on the same principle as the Gutenberg's press of the 1400s. Ours, however, is made of metal, while Gutenberg's was probably made of wood. The press was usually operated by two workers. One would ink the type, and the other would handle the paper stock. The tympan would be raised up to reveal the bed of the press where the lockup would be placed. The type would be inked and the tympan and frisket lowered down over the type. The bed of the press would be cranked in under the pressure plate, and the handle would be pulled. The pressure would bring the type and the frisket together to make a print on the frisket. This would show where the paper stock would need to be inserted. The print area would be cut out of the frisket, leaving an opening just large enough for the type to print on the paper stock. Guides of some sort would be devised to hold the paper stock in the correct position. The press is now ready for printing. The type would be inked each time a print was made. The prints would usually be hung or placed on drying racks until the ink had dried. Now let's see how the treadle press works. It is dated 1885 and was the typical press used in print shops during our western expansion. It is designed to be operated by one person and can be operated at a much faster rate of speed than the Washington press. The ink is evened out on the round ink disc as the three rollers pass over it. Each rotation, the rollers receive a new coating of ink, and the type is inked as the rollers go down and again as they go up. The press is operated by the foot treadle, and the large flywheel keeps the press moving evenly. The paper stock is fed into the platen, which contains gauge pens to hold the paper in place as the press closes. The throw-off lever is used if the paper is not in correctly and the type does not make contact. Other equipment in the shop are the guillotine paper cutter, the padding press, the sign press, and other smaller platen presses. As you watch the paper cutter do its job, you will understand why it's referred to as a guillotine cutter. The padding press applies a coating of glue on the edges of paper to create pads of paper. The sign press is used when larger type is needed to print larger posters. These were used in many stores to print their price signs before the computer replaced them. The smaller platen presses work similar to the treadle press, except you pull the handle instead of pumping the pedal. We have designed our museum for working machines only, and those used before the discovery of electricity. It is an excellent place to enjoy a hobby. We are also looking for people, young and old, to come in and learn the process and use the Print Shop Museum for their enjoyment.